Hello and good morning or good afternoon to everyone. I'm not sure when this is actually being aired, but I'm recording from a deep and darkest Norfolk as I'm mid-move to the UK, so my internet is a bit flaky, but hopefully this will keep going. But it's a short canter through 30 minutes of human considerations of automation, which I hope will keep you interested. First of all, I'd like to thank Emma and Vicky for kindly inviting me to take part in this. I'm delivering this as part of our IOD work. I'm vice chair now, having been chair and now relocating to the UK, I'm vice chair. Anyway, it's a brief canter through some experiences and hopefully you'll find them interesting. So, a lot of you will see I like pictures. I like to keep pictures and words to keep people interested. So, bit of background about me before I start for a couple of minutes. Began my career as a mainframe developer in the UK. Yes, we did actually wear suits and dresses like this at work, and these are the sort of things that I used to work on, which was quite interesting. In the glorious part of the city, central London, this is geographically the centre of London, and we were in a building next door to this, overlooking the Guildhall with some 3,000 odd developers. But we never saw a real user. We did many, many years of work and we almost never saw a real user until I instigated visits by developers to branch networks where we actually saw the people we were actually developing work for. So trying to get more connectivity with the end user was quite keen even in those early days. I then relocated to Jersey for a 2-year secondment, which some 34 years on was still ongoing, but mainly to get closer to the business and explore a few more things, and realize then that users do play a much larger part in the design, and that's part of my underlying theme for talking to you today, because it's their data. Well, it's the customer's data, but they're much closer to what's actually happening with it. I developed my first automation in '88, which is a long way back, and deployed it to a bank and then to various law firms, trust companies, and latterly government. And I'm going to give you a brief overview of some stories about that to hopefully share with you some of the background as to what was developed. More recently, when I do get out of the office, I do things like this. I turn all these little bits and pieces, and nuts and bolts and screws and rivets and tens of thousands of parts into this, where attention to detail does focus the mind, because you want all those bits to be going around at the same time, hopefully. But that's been a passion of mine. So if you'll excuse me, some of the pictures are aviation related, but it's to hopefully give you a bit more interest to what could be a dry subject. So I'm going to cover some stories that I've come along the way, hundreds and hundreds, but I wanted to try and pinch a few and just give you an overview of the human considerations of automation. So I'm going to relate some over the 30 odd years I've been developing across a variety of businesses. None of these businesses were actually set out to do automation or leading edge. They just had problems to solve and heavy data even in those days, but were resource light, and pretty much that describes most businesses today. They were also very time sensitive. People are always wanting returns fairly quickly, but we had a lot of human people around the building who could very much articulate what their problems were. And it was a really nice change to be so close to people and involve them in the process. And I hope you'll see that as a theme coming through. So all of the automation I'm going to be talking about today came from sitting down with real business people with real problems, not from some tech team locked away in a cupboard somewhere, which is how I started my early life. It was people in operations, finance, compliance, you name it, client facing, but they all had real problems to solve. And all went from being pretty much bot or robot agnostic to starting to ask the question, why am I doing this when we have automation? And I hope that's a theme that will come through the following slides. So why automate? Automation does like things. Humans don't, but automation tends to like things that are quite repetitive. It doesn't mind mundane things in terms of supporting long, boring processes. Automation can generally transform and load data with great degrees of confidence. Doesn't mind working 24/7, 365. I know staff feel they do that sometimes, but bots or automation generally doesn't mind, doesn't need lights. And it also reduces things like risk and obviously addresses some of your resources problems and scaling. And another side-on benefit is once you teach something about an old system, as that old system becomes more long in the tooth, the automation side remembers it as new stuff come along and perhaps don't remember it or don't know it. But humans tend not to like those sort of things. They don't like long repetitive work and working nights and weekends. Mundane tasks tend to bring about boredom, and boredom tends to bring in mistakes where people are doing long, drawn out processes. And people expect things to be 100% accurate now and for things to be done in a timely manner with low risk, ability to scale and so on. So humans don't tend to like the things that robots and automation do like. So it's a pretty good match if it's handled properly. So I'm going to give you some examples along the way. I've just picked out a handful of ones that I've done over the years where I hope it'll bring across the need and the benefits of involving people along the way. So one of the early ones, this is probably where it all first started for me back in the 80s, was bringing in a new system, which many people do, all the time nowadays. There's typically a small number of people, low levels of experience because they hadn't been involved in this before, but they'd been burning long hours into nights and weekends trying to get things done, trying to test the system. And tiredness was bringing in inaccurate testing. So we were looking at false errors, if you like. So we brought about a big change by involving those users and saying, wouldn't it be nice if you could take all this away from you? So the users then actually sat down and created the test conditions that they could understand, because the users are far more aware of the intricacies of how to react and how to create content for these sort of things and create some repeatable test conditions. And I say almost zero run effort. In fact, it was. Someone had to press the switch once and then go home. But having this on demand, day, night, doesn't really matter. Didn't complain about weekends. Didn't mind if you had to run it as soon as you'd finished running many hours, fix the problem and then have to run it all again. And reduces this false error. But data was controlled, accurate, and very, very up to date, thereby freeing the users to do much more esoteric type testing and checking and involving other teams. So it was a much more inclusive approach all round. So they felt in control. People got their time back. And as I mentioned, they can focus on better things like involving other people in the company. Another example, and I mentioned earlier about retaining legacy systems. The challenge was to retire an old system. By then, we probably had 50% of the staff who didn't even know about the old system. But to retain it, there was going to be quite a large 5-figure sum just to retain access to it. Most of the users had never used it, but it was a requirement that we needed to retain. And the challenge was to capture what we knew about that system before more people left, and we had even fewer people who knew about it. So simply to capture and involve all of the people who were involved in the original use of the product, get the senior staff to identify all the reports that they would ever want from it, the finance, the operational, the compliance, the client facing, and automate every single report, retaining all the correct amount of personal information, not too much, not too little, but containing it in a proper controlled manner. So very DP aware, but actually making the system far easier for people to use. Having put that all into all the output went into an indexed document store, and then the old system could be retired. The end-to-end process took less than a week. So quite a big saving. No staff needed to worry about it, and they had one less system to worry about, which helped everyone. So again, a big human aspect was involving all the people in that plan and that approach. A very simple solution for them to understand. They knew what we were doing, they knew how it was being approached. And as I say, they lost one of their line of business apps to worry about. The third one is more recent. This was done during COVID, where there was a bit more time pressure on this one, as ministers were promising that they were going to reduce the contributions during lockdown to help everyone. So it was very time critical, but of course people were unable to meet. So the contact side of planning was lost, which made it quite awkward and tricky. But nevertheless, people are quite resilient and can get engaged, and we did over several phone calls. But the challenge was we were working with very old legacy systems that had no interface capabilities and could only be run by humans who were no longer in the office because all the government buildings were closed. So the business team had a few meetings online, not too many, couple, planned a robust method of doing this, and actually sat down and said, what would a user do if they had to do this manually? And they would look at it, one system, extract the information, then key it into another. The estimated time of effort for this was going to be 80 days, and it was reduced to 4.5 hours in the end, ensuring that data was used properly and for the purposes only, just simply extracting what was needed and keying it across, which gave people a great insight as to how this could be used going forward. So speed and accuracy were key, particularly when you're dealing with quite sensitive payments. But it also gave the team the awareness that almost anything could be achieved. And that's what you need. You need that sort of trigger where people say, this is actually going to change our lives and make things much easier. No one wants to sit down and do 80 days worth of keying with 100% accuracy when you have a machine that can do that for you. So the preceding examples were mixed businesses. There were banks, law companies, trust, government, but all were left sort of stating and thinking to themselves, well, going forward, why am I doing these sort of things when we have automation that can do this? Another story, just on a slightly different angle, was when we were transferring some data from one system to another, and it had been missed in the testing. It was quite late, but the value of those transactions that had been missed exceeded £250,000, so we couldn't really write it off. The data items were very small, but there were 20 to 30,000 of them keyed across the whole customer base. The business had no time to commit to this. There was a lot of stress at the time because obviously we were weeks from going live, and they needed a speedy solution. At the time, just in passing, the bot was nicknamed Robert. It was the only named Robert in the company for many, many years, but it became known as Robert, and that's fine. A file was exported, and Robert spent 24 hours keying it. Unfortunately, one of the users had given us an incorrect data format, and the robot keyed the data incorrectly. There was quite a lot of consternation the next day once it was spotted. So it was reversed. So the robot spent the next 24 hours reversing that, and then spent the following 24 hours keying it again. The interesting human aspect of this was some staff who weren't really aware of who Robert was were asking if Robert was going to be sacked or punished for his mistake. And that reverberated around for several days before they realized that Robert was actually not a human. and was actually a machine. But it's interesting how people assumed there was some sort of criticism that could be applied towards this and to sort things out. Anyway, thought I'd do a couple of slides on risk, just talking about the human aspect of risk approaching this. So not engaging humans in the process is quite a downside, and to de-risk that, obviously you want to get people involved and work with them. Most of your people will know the things that are causing them most angst and most labor intense efforts, that they can work with you. Securing your best users, I found over many years, becomes untenable. That's why they're your best users. They're the ones who are good at client facing or problem solving, and therefore they're not seen as usable resource for things like testing or changing systems. Testing and cleansing becomes more compressed as more and more businesses want to move more quickly. And obviously with things like agile development, you're doing this more and more and more again, iteratively through the year. So the ability to do speedy regression, confirmation that things are okay, is very, very key. Maintaining user engagement in the roadmap. Many people start off with an initial plan to automate something and then are not really sure where to go next. Organizing with your users the next key points are really good, and get your users to point you where to go next. Usually it's done on a financial return, but it might equally be done on a risk return. Reducing risk is quite key nowadays, given the heavy penalties that can be associated with it. But release people to do what they're best at, which is other things like talking to people or talking to customers or getting involved in the more human aspects of supporting and running your business. Which brings us nicely on to a quick slide on ethics. One thing I don't think this slide mentions is in 33 years of automation, I've never been involved in a company that is involved in letting someone go because of the automation. Far from it. You seem to make more and more strides when you can use automation properly as a sort of self-augmented service. So no one wants to take long, boring jobs. I've mentioned some of these things before, but it's worth stressing. And of course, with current 18 months, 2 years we've had, no one's really rushing to work long weekends or evenings. And most mundane processes I mentioned before, it lead to lack of concentration and mistakes creeping in. But your business are the ones who know things that you should be doing and should be automating. And it always makes me wonder as to why companies don't really know what they want to automate. There are so many things that you could, which would make people's lives far more valuable and directed. But you want to get people to a point where they say, why can't a bot do this? And we'll develop it along those lines. But a key quote there, which I pinched from Emma a couple of years ago from my presentation at the IOD, was to build the solutions on human values, not the exploitation of them. Again, another good measure is people looking at the bits you've automated, and no one is sad to see those bits automated. Far from it. They want to move on. So I mentioned self-augmentation there as another term for automation and robotics, but with Generation X as it is now, and we have a much younger workforce, there's far less tolerance in mundane tasks, and users are expecting pretty much instant gratification, and clients have been demanding it for many years. In reality, we're a long way off it, but in practice, we could be much, much closer. And automation, as well as helping you streamline things, can also remove the chance for error and data misuse. So it has a very good data quality aspect about it as well. If you automate the process properly, then you reduce, by inference, you reduce those chances of error. And it is like everyone having their own PA to assist things like this if it's deployed properly. So finally, a few takeaways, if I can. Work very closely with your users, involve them, include them, engage them. You'll always get that worry that when you deploy automation, people will feel it's taking my job. In my experience across all of those platforms, banks, finance, government, that worry has been about a few hours long. Once they see what it can do and how the sensible delivery of automation can help them, there's a big push, and they'll be pushing you, which is what you need. Help them to drive your roadmap and plan what comes next, and build solutions, as I said, on human values, not the exploitation of them. It's such a good ethos to work to, but foster an environment where you can fail. People are doing things more rapidly, and you've got to have an environment where you can fail, but you can learn from it. I've always said that you learn far, far more from when things go wrong. But get to a point where you've got this ethos of the users challenging you. Why am I doing this when we do have automation? And build an environment where the humans can do what they do best, and that's be human and interact. Anyway, thank you for listening, and I hope you have a good seminar, and thank you for your time.